Hello, everyone, and welcome to block party number 176, which will be happening this Friday, May 8th, 2024, as well as the podcast called The Start is Near, episode number 21, starting at noon Pacific time. So the topics that we want to talk about today are four different classes of vectors, each of which can or will get us to CHISY, to full-blown collective human superintelligence. And last week we talked about two of those classes of vectors, and today we're going to talk about two others. And so the first one is Operation Welcome Home is a vector, and there's a class of vectors which we characterize as those vectors which are community-centric. So the class is community-centric vectors that focus on a specific community and bringing that community together. The second class of vectors is exemplified by what we talk about as the Paul Beckwith after party. And that class of vectors is what we refer to as topic-centric vectors. In the case of the Paul Beckwith after party, focused on the topic of global warming and its effects and its possible solutions, etc. So that's the topic-centric set of vectors, or class of vectors, in that there could be multiple vectors based on multiple different topics, and we hope that there will be. In fact, we're committed that there be multiple after-party vectors spanning multiple topics. The third class of vectors consists of those vectors which are mission-centric or focused on a specific mission, like ending hunger. And so, for example, my background picture here shows Community Cafe. That's part of the mission to end hunger. And so this class of vectors is mission-centric. So each vector is focused on a specific mission, and each of those vectors brings together those people who are sympathetic to that mission or working on that mission or simply wanting to talk about that mission, but it's mission-centric. And the fourth vector is what I call Mike's Genii, which is plural for genius. So Mike's geniuses, if you prefer. And so Mike will talk about that. That's a fourth vector, which now, sorry, a fourth class of vectors, but it's a vector in and of itself. Mike is the vector, and along with his geniuses. And in all four of these classes, it's fundamentally about bringing together a community that either exists or doesn't exist before the vector comes into its own. But the vector's job is largely, but not entirely, to bring that community or group or pre-community together into a community. In the case of, let's say, the second class of vectors, the after-party vectors, with Paul Beckwith's after party being an example, that vector will bring together what I'll just call the Paul Beckwith community, which at present moment simply does not exist as a community. There's a Paul Beckwith audience, and we're going to be transforming that audience into a community through the Paul Beckwith after party. But as of now, there is no Paul Beckwith community per se that I'm aware of. So let me start with doing kind of a screen sharing, a little graph that makes clear the first two classes of vectors. And Mike and Marco, first of all, thank you guys for being here, and feel free to chime in with any questions or comments. as we move along. So in this image here, I've got, there's two dimensions to it. There's the dimension that is communities. There's this other horizontal dimension, which is topics. And so, for example, the veterans as as a community, that is this whole blue hashed segment, which I'll just highlight in yellow for the moment. And what that means is these are these veterans meeting to discuss any topic in this whole range of topics that the horizontal axis symbolizes. And so, for example, one of those topics, or topic spaces rather, because each of these topic spaces breaks into myriad very specific topics. And so if you look at the bottom of this graph here, the global warming topic space consists of all these little or big specific topics that I'm representing as these vertical little hash marks on the axis. And it's the whole of all those that constitutes the global warming space. So here, I'll just shade that space here in green. So pop quiz, what does the intersection of the global warming space and the veteran space, this square right in the middle here, what does that intersection signify? What does it represent? What is that rectangle in the very middle of the screen, bordered in black? What does that signify? What does that
The
represent?
intersection of the community of vets and the topic of global warming.
The topic space of global warming. Yeah, but what is that?
Right.
What is that intersection? What does that signify, like physically? How would you describe it to someone who says, "Well, what is that? What is that intersection?"
It's where veterans might get involved with the global warming
Yeah,
topic.
it's where the veteran community discusses any and all topics within the space of topics called global warming. That's what that intersection signifies. All right. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, good.
Yep.
Good. Whereas the global warming column on its own, this entire green shaded column, represents any and all communities or any and all people engaged in a conversation about global warming. Analogous to how this veteran horizontal here is one specific community talking about any and all topics under the sun. Okay. So if that's what we're looking at in terms of communities and topics, what if we then now bring in the space, the class of vectors called the mission-centric vectors. And to get there from here, I'm going to add a third dimension, which kind of goes into the screen here, and that's the dimension of time. Okay. So what that means is over the course of time, each of these topic spaces evolves, each of these communities evolves, and some of these topic spaces, like, for example, global warming, might evolve from just talking about global warming, like we might do at the Paul Beckwith after party, to actually doing something about global warming, like, researching, developing, and ultimately implementing marine cloud brightening. So let's say that as the topic of let's say that the topic of global warming has evolved to a certain point, so that at this point in the time vector, let's call it T sub MCB for the marine cloud brightening time, that at this time in the future, it's global warming has evolved to the point that we're now actually taking action and fulfilling on a mission called marine cloud brightening, cool the planet through marine cloud brightening. And so that would then define a new kind of vertical band of all those communities that are discussing and actually working on the mission of marine cloud brightening. So now this is an imprecise graph because as time marches forward along this dimension here, this arrow here, and let's just talk about the x-axis, the x dimension, the y dimension. Oops. The y dimension here and the z dimension here, which is time. I mean, I'm kind of mixing things here and being a little messy in the process, because we could just leave this three-dimensional graph to represent topics, communities, and time, and maybe create a whole new graph that represents communities, missions, and time. But I'm kind of mixing the two here just to kind of so I don't have to draw a second graph actually. But any questions or comments about what I'm saying here about, you know, the evolution of a topic into a mission? I mean, for me, it's a natural evolution. These topics aren't just to be discussed. They're, you know, especially if they're important topics, they're supposed to, the discussions need to give way into action, to actual missions to accomplish something. Anyway, I'll pause for questions or comments.
No, I really like the time dimension that you've added to this, Jamie. That's really it. That's kind of what we were talking about the other day, or what I was trying to grasp at, but I like that a lot.
Oh, good. Excellent.
And as far as being, you know, a little messy, hey, that's life.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and I would encourage anyone listening to, sorry, Jamie, to interrupt, but so this is what we were talking about in terms of it almost, I don't know how to say it, but this is like a three-dimensional graph, right? And I think you're going to go for, with the missions here, I think you're going to go for another dimension, but yeah, I know this looks really good. I like it.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Well, I didn't actually have any other dimensions to add to this graph per
Right.
se.
I'm using an incorrect word there, but yeah.
Oh, okay. But one of the things that I will add to this graph is people. Like, so if there's an individual here, that person might belong to the veteran community and might belong to this other community over here and this other community over here, etc. That person may find themselves participating first in the global warming conversations here, right? And then over time may find themselves participating in the marine cloud brightening mission over here, just following again that time vector this way. So we can add people, and that's one way of getting around the obvious problem of this graph as far as communities. Well, there's this community and there's this community and there's this community, and they appear to be disjoint, right? But in, you know, that people can only belong to one or the other, but in fact, a person can belong to any number of communities. And as certain topics come to the forefront, become very, very popular, and even evolve into missions, the idea is that a person's involvement in that topic space and in that mission, as indicated by the thickness of this red line here. So this individual may spend the lion's share of their time on first the global warming topic that then evolves into the marine cloud brightening mission, and they may spend very little time in the other communities, even though they're members of those other communities. So, as Mike and I were talking about a couple of days ago, we, what is the point of doing all these graphs and talking about different classes of vectors and all that kind of stuff? And it's simply to create a framework within which to think about communities versus topics versus missions and other, classes of vectors. There could be many, many other classes of vectors that are candidate vectors for achieving CHSI, right? We've talked a fair amount about the veterans. We've talked about the Paul Beckwith after party, building towards CHSI, attracting lots and lots of people. So anyway, I hope that's interesting. It sounds like it is. And with that, I'm going to go off screen share. And now I'd like to call upon Mike, to talk about, well, first to clarify. So there's two missions I've mentioned so far. One is the mission to cool the planet using marine cloud brightening. Another is the mission to feed everyone or end hunger, as exemplified by that image you see on the screen that says Community Cafe. Anyway, now we're going to talk about a fourth class of vectors, or simply a fourth vector. I don't even know what kind of class to put it in. It's sort of in a class by itself. The vector and the class are one, but that is what I refer to as Mike's Genii, or Mike's Geniuses, if you prefer. And with that, I will pass the talking feather to none other than Mike himself. Mike, tell us about Mike's Genii.
Well, do you want me to kind of do a similar version of what we did in the car the other day?
Yeah, if you'd like. I want you to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking to the audience here. You're talking to whoever's listening, and
Okay.
you're going to tell them what Mike's Genii is about. What's the point? What's the objective? And why you think that's going to help us achieve CHSI. Over to you, Mike. Thanks.
Well, I honestly, I just couldn't be more appreciative, Jamin. That's yeah. So this is a really interesting, let's say, part of the puzzle to me. So as I was explaining to Jamin the other day, I have found a way, I guess, to, let's say, bring together some very, very smart people, and as we continue to bring them together, so we have intractable problem, or seemingly intractable problems, which I don't believe that they're completely they're impossible to overcome, as part of, or puzzles, in part, as part of all everything we're talking about. And my my thought was many years ago that instead of focusing on each individual piece of the puzzle, bring together experts or high performers in their various fields. And as we bring them together, which I didn't know, or I wouldn't have been able to put it into terms that Jamin has articulated over many episodes as we've gone forward and grown forward together here. But on our way to Chi, collective human intelligence, I guess, without being able to articulate it before, but I have more words now after participating in these meetings. The thought would be that if I can accumulate or accrue enough high performing people in their fields, put them all together, kind of, I don't know, like the spaghetti shotgun method, which I'm not sure if that lands or not, Jamin, but the idea of throwing all these geniuses together, and maybe that will help us reach Chi, or collective human intelligence. And then, we can work towards collective human super intelligence, all these people that are high performers in their fields, and then bringing them together. And as we do that, we would be able to basically, I guess Dr. Strike would have called it interdisciplinary context. So the idea that she had these labs that she would run where she would have professors, students, didn't matter what discipline, but we would come together, and we were focused on complexity science at the time. And as we would bring this group of people together, everyone in their different fields and interdisciplinary contexts were enriched by the participation in these discussions. So, I mean, in in honor of Dr. Strink, I think I kind of took that and ran with it in terms of, if we could do that in an academic setting, then we can certainly do that in a real world setting. In terms of, and I mean, we do this with the start is near. We've been doing this since now I think December, and certainly Jamin and Marco were doing a version of this with the block party and everyone else who was involved. But with Chi, or working towards Chi, and then or collective human superintelligence thereafter, whether that involves AI or not doesn't really matter. It's Chi would kind of represent, the initial collection of these individuals together that would hopefully, yield to some emergent property superhuman or collective human superintelligence, or Chizzy. I don't know if that lands enough, Jamin.
Yeah, let's talk about it, and let's get Marco's input if and when you're ready, Marco. But first of all, the other three classes of vectors leading towards Chizzy all emerged from people like us getting together and talking about it and saying, hey, what if we did this? What could emerge from that? So, for example, the community of veterans, we have very high hopes for Operation Welcome Home, bringing these veterans together, supporting them in myriad ways. And then we believe that Chi and then ultimately Chizzy would be emergent from these veterans getting together in conversation about all these topics that matter. And likewise for the topic-centric and mission-centric Chizzy vectors. So I would say the hypothesis of Mike's genii or geniuses is put enough of these geniuses from different backgrounds and different perspectives together, and just the Chi, the collective human intelligence of that combination, might yield whole other classes of vectors or standalone vectors. For how do we bring together a critical mass of humanity operating in a form of collective human intelligence that can then grow exponentially towards Chizzy, or collective human super intelligence. So that's how it lands for me. And in fact, the block parties are kind of especially the Start Is Near podcast is really a manifestation of Mike's geniuses coming together. And Mike does an incredible job of seeking out, finding, and roping in geniuses from around the world, for which we're super grateful. Mike, I don't know if you have more to add to that, or Marco, you want to jump in, but in any case, I'm passing the feather.
Well, you humble me, Jamin, but you summed it up very nicely there. Marco, go ahead. I saw you on mute.
Just testing my equipment here because it's getting a little funky on me. But no, this is exactly, what it takes. This idea that we sit around waiting for misinformed, uninformed, and corrupt governments to try and figure out the things that need to be done for society has proven. I mean, all anybody has to do is look around and see that it's not going well. So the smart thing to do is put smart people together and let them just, bounce around until they figure out, people are going to stick. Groups are going to form, cohesive groups with a love for a specific category of problems that need solving. And smart people love to solve problems. So this is like, the ultimate like the ultimate game. And the winners end up being all life on this planet. And with
You
that,
just said something very interesting there, Marco. It is, it's kind of interesting. It's not, and this is what's important about what Jamin is trying to illustrate here. Yes, absolutely. Like the spaghetti shotgun method of like shooting them all together, letting them bounce around is one thing. But then, as we are talking about here, and as Jamin, his specific genius to this is that we are building this framework so that once we have this, super pool of geniuses, or genii, as Jamin said, then we have this framework to kind of organize and allow them to, put their skill sets, where they want to and their efforts where they want to without having to like stumble into each other all the time. If that makes sense, Jamin, but sorry.
Wait, you're saying without having to stumble into each other? What do you mean by
Well,
stumble?
so it's one thing to throw all the genii at each other and just watch them bounce around, like Marco was saying. It's a completely other thing to have the framework that we're developing here, but really that you have been thinking about over the past couple of weeks and the past couple of days, because having the framework allows for to genii to work together cohesively and coherently in a way that just wasn't possible when, say, Dr. Strink was working on this, right? Those genii, let's say, came together by virtue of her and the academic setting or whatever. But we're not reliant on one single university or one single governance or private or public company, and I don't think we should be limited by that. But what you've been working on here, and again, it's just you amaze me every time when you bring these things up and you just kind of create these graphs. But realistically, like having those drawings and illustrations is important because it allows for a cohesion and an organization. Which she used to call it like in complexity science, she called it complex adaptive systems, and this is why I brought up panarchy before. But we don't need to go down that rabbit hole here. We'll save that for the start is near something, or maybe something I do myself with us or whatever in conjunction with the start is near. But the framework that you're articulating, because I mean, I'm going to just tell you right now, there's been plenty of points in history that a bunch of geniuses have got together and then they get nothing done, right? Because it's like they get stuck on they get stuck on which topic's more important, or like, oh, we need to focus on this, we need to focus on that. The framework that we're developing here, that you've been developing over the past couple of weeks and certainly the past couple of days, that will allow us to kind of direct the chaos, let's say, if that works. I'm not sure really, but yeah, passing the feather.
Yeah, interesting. What comes to mind when Marco was talking about, creating this as a game, and I'll draw some pictures in a minute, but what was coming to mind is sort of like the ultimate game of Tetris, where you're not fitting together two-dimensional geometric pieces, but you're fitting together, geniuses and just people generally into these conversations. And going back a few months now, we did some video recordings on the topic of Chizzy itself, and we described it as an unbounded network of conversations that's hyper-connected, that's self-aware, that each conversation is aware that it's part of a network, an unbounded network of conversations. And one analogy that comes to mind is like, what is it called? An integrated circuit, with all these like transistors and logic gates and all that. But instead of being consisting of transistors that can hold 0 or 1, it consists of a whole bunch of people in this matrix of minds that are temporally divided into distinct conversations or distinct groups in conversation, but people can actually move from one conversation to another. The conversations are transcribed and recorded if the participants choose to record them, and all those transcriptions can be put into an index so that people searching for, oh, I'm looking for a conversation where they're talking about this kind of stuff, imagine that those words are like put into some sort of advanced search that combs through the index of conversations and their transcripts in search of those conversations that best fit to the search criteria, whatever words you put in and say, I'm looking for a conversation where they're doing this or talking about that. So anyway, I now think by analogy of that network of conversations as being like a network of neurons, except super neurons. Each conversation is this super neuron, you know, filled with whatever participants are there. And these conversations, when they fire, it's like they maybe tweet out an idea that they just came, or an insight that they just came up with. And other conversations can subscribe to whatever feeds from whatever other conversations are out there, or have bots in their conversation that are digesting and indexing the transcripts from these other conversations. And these bots can speak up whenever one of the conversations that they're following has something of interest or relevance to the conversation in question. So I think of all that as kind of like this emergent planetary brain of consisting of conversations interacting and people, you know, cross-pollinating from conversation to conversation. I mean, I've just reached a point where it's like, it is so clear to me, to us, that that is Chizzy, and that's what we must strive for. And so now it's a matter of, well, if that's what we must strive for, how do we get there from here? Right? What are the pathways, or what are the vectors that can get us from where we are to there? Passing the feather.
I don't have anything to add really to that, Jamin. That was beautifully said. It makes me think of, like, you know, an activated neural network or something. Like you talked about the collective brain, but yeah, you got it.
Well, it kind of reminds me of, you know, the world, and, you know, back from little microorganisms cruising the planet, and that's what there was. And then takes years and years, millions, sometimes millions, billions of years for things to come together in a way that they change and become. I only have language to use right now, so you got to make the best of it. And once again, I'll state how inefficient it is. So things happen slowly when left to their own devices. So like now we know there's a world full of genii out there, and but some of them are really, you know, just unhappy with the way the world is, and they've gone into hermit mode. I did it myself. And that's not helpful to saving, you know, and correcting the problems we've created on this planet. So, but as and a person that comes to mind right now is Doc Time, professor of inorganic chemistry. And, you know, when you think about inorganic chemistry, it takes bringing things together with a catalyst to make something fascinating happen. And right now, you know, we got the genii, and like Mike's the catalyst right now, bringing them together. So that's how I look at it.
These Mike stories are getting out of hand, I think.
No, definitely. If you have been a catalyst for bringing people together that would not naturally have met, or may, you know, would not have met soon enough. And I'm going under the assumption now that we are getting together soon enough, that we're gonna, you know, pull the rabbit out of the hat at the last minute. And because we are in those last minutes of what anybody can really look at as normalcy on this, you know, based on our history of the last, let's say, 100 years, what anybody alive right now knows as normal. And we're in the last minutes of that. So yeah, I think the time is not only near, the start is near, but, you know, the time is now.
You're on mute, Jamin, I think.
All right. So with that, unless there's more to say, and we can always do a second video or add to this video, I I say we invite passionately everyone to join us on the Block Party. And in particular, the Start is Near podcast starting at 12 noon Pacific time, and the Afterglow, which follows immediately after the podcast. Please join us. Let's make this happen. If you can think up other vectors or classes of vectors for how to get to Chizzy, we're all ears. And we think the vectors that we've already identified are pretty exciting. And it's going to take some doing to make them happen. And this is the kind of stuff we talk about every day and work on every day. So please join us. What could be more exciting than putting together the collective human superintelligence that will come up with the solutions and the transformations to save and heal life on Earth? Join us, Passing the Feather.
Yeah, I just want to clearly point out that I know we've thrown the word genius around a lot here, and we have attracted some very intelligent people into the conversation. But don't think that your input, no matter your level of education, because level of education has nothing to do with intelligence or having a brain that might have just the smallest part of the puzzle, or maybe the biggest part of the puzzle, and you just don't even know it. Something you've kicked around in your head for decades may just have to, join in a conversation here and listen, and then go, oh, what they're talking about, that kind of sounds like this thing I thought about. And so everybody needs to be in this conversation. Everybody. There is no one that should feel this is not a conversation you can take part in, because it absolutely is.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll just reiterate my invitation to everyone to join us and bring your friends. We'll see you this Friday, May 10th. The block party will start at 8 a.m. Pacific time and go for 24 hours. All right. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Mike and Marco, for being here. We'll see you all this Friday. Thanks, everyone.